Good evening, everyone. My name is Rainey Ott, and I'm one of the planners working on the short-term dwelling rental and bed and breakfast code update. The other planner on this is the lead planner. Her name is Jasmine Rodenberg, and we apologize in advance of any technological issues or difficulties that we experience. We are all very new to this virtual world, and this is the first virtual open house that Boulder County Community Planning and Permitting has hosted. So we hope it goes smoothly. Fingers crossed. Um, so this is the short-term dwelling rental and bed and breakfast code update, DC-19-0005. And what we're going to talk about tonight is first, we're going to go through the current land use code. I'm going to wait until we have all microphones muted. All right. So first, we're going to go through the current land use code, and then we're going to talk about why we think the code needs to change now, and the new direction and ideas we have. We'll also tell you about the community feedback that we've received so far and some of our frequently asked questions that we've come across. At the very end, we will have breakout sessions on specific topics, which will be a better place for you to ask questions and to have more discussion. So we ask that you do not interrupt with vocally during the presentation. You're welcome to type things into the chat box if you wish. We will also have some live polls that will ask you to answer some questions. So if you want to participate in the live polls, then all you need to do is open your web browser on your computer or smartphone or other device and go to www.menti.com. And I'll say that again for the folks that are on the phone in case they would like to join in the live poll. That's www.menti.com. And you'll enter the code 460414. That's code 460414. So let's ask our first question. So with the live poll on menti.com, using that code, which is also at the top of the screen if you forgot it, in which area or areas is your property or residence located in Boulder County? And if you're not in the county, where do you live? We want to know who we're talking to tonight. I'll give a few minutes for some
Would
of
you
the...
say again where on the screen I have to fill this in?
So it should have some boxes on once you enter menti.com and enter that code 460414. Then there should be some boxes and the question that pops up, and you'll be able to type into the boxes show up on the screen. Looks like we have a lot of folks from Netherlands and Allens Park. The words with the largest text on the screen are the ones that are receiving the most input. So that's seems like most people on this call are from Allens Park in Netherlands. So we've got a lot of mountain people, although we've got a pretty good mix all over the county. I'll give it just another minute, and then I'll close this poll.
Where do I see the large words?
It should be on the screen.
the Menti screen.
On the Teams screen. If you're looking at my presentation that's on the screen, you
I
should
see
be able to
you,
see.
and then I see another person too, whose name I don't know, with glasses. But I don't see what you're describing.
Mr. Harris, this is Richard Hackett with staff.
Thanks.
You may only see a small icon of the screen on the lower part of your Teams window. So if you do see kind of a thumbnail, small image of the words, you may need to try to click on that once to get that to show. Teams sometimes defaults to the last camera, the last person who was speaking. So yeah, look down at the lower part of your window for your Teams app. And if you see a thumbnail image of the words, that's what you should click on to get it to display larger.
Well, I'm using a Mac. I don't know whether that makes any difference or not, but it has.
Are you using a web browser or a Teams application you downloaded?
I'm using the application.
Okay, it should be on the application, I believe. I'll try to troubleshoot and get back to you if we can continue. Okay.
Oh, now on the Mentimeter thing, I see a current land use code.
Yeah, so I closed the poll, and we're going to move on just for the sake of time. So I'm going to go over our current land use code, and then Jasmine is going to pick it up after that. Currently, short-term dwelling rentals in our code are defined as a dwelling that is rented in durations of less than 30 days at a time. And so if your dwelling is rented for 30 days or more at a time, that is considered a long-term rental, and that is just a by right residential use. So we're only talking about the rentals that are for a week, 2 weeks, or a weekend. And the districts in which these short-term dwelling rentals are permitted are broken into two categories. On the top, ag, forestry, historic, mountain institutional, and several others. If you're renting for less than 14 nights per year, it's by right. Between 14 and 45 nights per year, it is still by right, but you have to meet some additional provisions in the code. And then if you're over 46 nights per year, then a public hearing is required with the Board of County Commissioners. You have to meet those additional provisions, and you have to meet the special use criteria in the code. On the bottom, you'll see some more zoning districts. That's rural residential, estate residential, suburban residential, and several others. Again, it's by right at less than 14 nights per year. But once you exceed 14 nights, you'll have to do the same as the others, go to a public hearing with the Board of County Commissioners, meet the additional provisions in the code, and meet the special criteria in the code.
And Rainey, we had a question asking what by right means. So could you explain that perhaps?
Yes, by right means that you can do that use without any other oversight from us, really. You can just do it. So you can camp on a vacant property for 14 nights a year by right. You can rent a house out for a year at a time by right. You don't have to ask us for permission, in other words. So those additional provisions that I was talking about that have to be met if you're over a certain number of nights, currently in our code, you have to have an approved septic system by Boulder County Public Health. You also have to have the structure that's being rented out has to have a valid building permit and meet the applicable building code at the time of its construction. Or if it predates building permit requirements, it has to be structurally sound. You also have to have a legal building lot, which means that your parcel was legally created through a process that's recognized by our code. And you also have to have legal access to that property. Smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, also fire extinguishers are all required. And then you have to give your guests a map showing the parcel boundaries and where they can park on the site. And it's limited to 2 adults per bedroom with a maximum of 8 people unless otherwise approved. And that is usually based off of septic system size. So those are our current provisions for short-term dwelling rentals that you have to meet for over 14 nights per year, for if it's rented more than 14 nights per year. So bed and breakfasts are another thing that's involved in this code update. And the current definition is an owner-occupied or tenant-occupied single-family dwelling that offers transient lodging accommodations where meals may be provided. They are only allowed right now if approved through a public hearing process with the Board of County Commissioners, and they're only allowed in the forestry, agricultural, rural residential, suburban residential, and mountain institutional zoning districts. They also can have no more than 3 guests, and no more than 6 guests can stay on a given night. Sorry, 3 guest rooms and 6 guests per night. That's 2 people per bedroom.
And what about access to the property?
They have to have legal access. And I would ask that everyone saves their questions for those breakout sessions. That's perfectly fine. We know you're very eager, but we just, since there are so many of us on here, the breakout sessions will be more conducive to conversation. Now Jasmine will take over.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited that you all are here in the virtual space with us. So I went through a lot of the questions that were asked when people filled out the forms to register for tonight's event. And one of the biggest questions was, why are we changing the code now? So the 3 big reasons we're doing it is because our regulations as they currently stand were adopted in 2008, so they're a bit outdated. And since 2008, short-term rentals as an option for people when they're traveling has increased nationwide, and definitely in Boulder County as well. And we've received consistent input from a variety of individuals within the community stating that our current code isn't working to adequately address the impacts from the short-term rentals. And part of that reason is that our current code treats short-term dwelling rentals fairly equally across the board when there might be differences in impact based on the type of short-term rental. So if it's someone's primary home and they live there full time versus, it being a vacation rental that people just rent out as a vacation rental. And it might be different based on location. So if there's a dense residential neighborhood, there might be different impacts than if this is in a mountain zone or something like that. The other thing we've heard is that we need to improve our enforcement mechanisms. And so we're trying to address that through this update. And another thing that we're very concerned about at Boulder County is the decrease in housing availability and affordability. So if long-term rentals are becoming short-term rentals, so homes that would be rented out year-round by an individual are now just only available for people vacationing on a short-term basis, that diminishes the housing stock we have in Boulder County. And the other thing is that property values increase and ultimately price people out in areas that are dense with short-term dwelling rentals. So with that, we have some ideas on the direction that we'd like to go, and that's why we're seeking input from you all. And our main idea currently is that we'll have 2 separate types of uses, an accessory residential use and a principal lodging use. So an accessory residential use would be where this home is someone's primary residence. So you live in your home and you maybe travel a couple weeks or months out of the year, and you want to rent out your home either while you're there or while you're traveling. So that would be an accessory residential use. With that use, because it is someone's primary residence, there might be fewer negative impacts. And so we think that an administrative review might be more appropriate. And with that administrative review, it would be staff takes in an application, make sure it meets the criteria, and staff would issue a letter stating that it's an approved use or approved with certain conditions or a denied use. After that, there would be a 14-day period where the public could submit comments. And if they do submit comments, the Board of County Commissioners could call it up to have a public hearing if they chose to do so. And if the applicant didn't like the decision or the conditions that were made, then they could appeal that as well. So that's the administrative review process. And because we're asking that it would be someone's primary residence, that leaves the question of what sort of residency requirement would we ask? And we've heard that there might need to be multiple metrics, and we'll ask some questions more about this later on, but we've heard ranges from there shouldn't be any residency requirement at all to someone should have to live there 6, 9, 12 months out of the year. So that's the accessory short-term rental use. And then there's this other use that we would call a seasonal short-term rental. And this is new from the Coffee with a Planner sessions, if those of you who are on here attended those. And this would be for those cabins that aren't necessarily built for year-round living, so they're not winterized. And those cabins are used often by the property owner as well. And so those could be subject to an administrative review. The next category would be a principal lodging use. And these uses are where the home is maybe someone's second home, third home, and it's not a primary residence. So someone doesn't live there for a majority of the year. And it's mostly just to be rented out on a short-term basis. So for those, the idea is that there might be more negative impacts because it's not someone's primary home that they're trying to keep up, and they don't come back to return to the home and check on it over time. So there might be more issues with that. And so with those uses, we'd require a public hearing, and those don't have to be owner occupied. So that's the principal lodging use. Bed and breakfasts kind of fit somewhere in between. It is a lodging use, but we think it might warrant administrative review because we'd require that it would be owner occupied during all rental periods. And so that would be, yeah, so it would be an administrative review, but only if it's owner occupied and one meal is provided. And that's kind of what distinguishes bed and breakfasts from other short-term dwelling rentals. And I do see some questions in the side asking about what the limited zoning districts are going to be for the lodging uses. And that's something that we're exploring and trying to figure out. So we'll keep that in mind, and we're open to input. But as of right now, the thought is that dense residential neighborhoods might not be appropriate. And Rainey answered it in the chat feature as well. So other ideas that we have that are more overarching, the first is that we would have a licensing program. So regardless of the type of rental that you would be going for, lodging use, accessory residential use, after you got approved through that process, you would have to get a license. And that we would do either an annual renewal or semi-annual renewal for that license. So you wouldn't have to come back in to ask to get a short-term rental every year. You would just have to renew your license every year if you keep using your property as a short-term rental. For enforcement, some thoughts that we have is with a licensing program, it's easy to revoke a license. And so that is one of the enforcement mechanisms. Fines is something we're looking into, along with third-party oversight. So there's different companies that help local governments manage short-term dwelling rentals and keep track of them. So it's something that we would potentially look into as a way to help enforce our code. Some potential conditions of approval. So these would kind of be, okay, you've got your license and you can operate as long as you comply with these items. One of them would be local management. So if you're on vacation in France and someone's renting out your place out here and something goes wrong, how do they know that they can get in contact with someone easily? So that's why we'd require local management, and we would require that that person be within 1 hour of the property being rented out so they could respond pretty quickly. We would also require that there'd be an information sheet on septic usage, wildlife safety, wildfire safety, and evacuation routes. So a lot of people who are vacationing in Colorado don't necessarily understand the wildfire risks we have, might not be familiar with septic tanks, and might not understand that if you don't, put your trash away in the mountains, a bear might be sniffing around for some goodies. So making sure that people who are renting out have the right information and don't cause problems for the broader community. We would also require some sort of building safety inspection. The scope of that we haven't yet determined, and wildfire mitigation as well. So we've had a couple of opportunities for public feedback so far. The first is there was a survey distributed last year, November. Well, I'm not entirely sure because Rainey and I took over after this, but we did review those results of those surveys. And after looking at the survey results, there are over 1,000 people who took it, although we do understand it might not be a representative sample of all of Boulder County, but it does give us a sense of how some people think that these should be regulated. A majority of people felt that there should be short-term dwelling rentals allowed with some form of regulations. Some people thought they should be regulated a lot more, and some people a lot less. Overwhelmingly, people wanted a local management requirement and felt as though there should be some form of owner occupancy or residency requirement, and that minimum stay requirements were not appropriate. So the last couple of weeks, we also held these coffee with a planner meetings virtually. And through those, we kind of asked the public what some positive and negative impacts of short-term rentals are that they saw in the community. Some of the positive impacts, the biggest one was supplemental income, whether that's supplemental retirement income or supplemental income to help run a local farm, or supplemental income to help afford houses in Boulder County. That was probably the #1 positive impact. In addition to that, short-term dwelling rentals can help support agritourism, provide local jobs through management or cleaning the short-term rentals after they're rented out. Money to help keep seasonal cabins maintained, and it brings people in to support the local economy. A lot of the negative impacts that we've heard about and want to make sure that we help regulate to mitigate those impacts are a parking problem, particularly in dense residential neighborhoods, noise, increased traffic, and then housing stock and affordability. A lot of people felt as though requiring local management and the information sheets were great ideas and should be required for all types of short-term dwelling rentals, and that the license requirement was a good idea. When we break it down into the principal lodging use and the accessory residential use, many folks felt as though the principal lodging use, so it's not someone's primary residence, was not an appropriate use for dense neighborhoods. There was mixed feedback on a public hearing requirement. Yeah, those can go either way. So there's not a lot of certainty if you have to have a public hearing, and people were concerned about that when they are considering purchasing properties. And there was discussion about a need for a third use in between a lodging use and an accessory residential use. People felt as though lodging uses might be more appropriate when, someone's buying 3, 4, 5 properties and they're just using them as income properties. And that's very different from maybe someone who's bought a second cabin up in the mountains and uses it very frequently, or they have a family cabin that they want to keep. And so maybe that those shouldn't both be called lodging uses. And so that's why we came up with this idea of a seasonal cabin use. So that's our thought there. And then with the accessory residential use, with the residency requirement, again, there was a lot of mixed feedback between there shouldn't be, a requirement any more than 3 months, because some people work from home. Almost a lot of people now actually work from home, and so people travel a lot more. If people are retired, then they might travel more than 6 months out of the year. So there is mixed feedback on what a residency requirement might look like. But a lot of people like the administrative review process to help keep things streamlined. So now, after going through all of that, would kind of like to hear from you all about what you are most concerned about regarding the operation or regulation of short-term rentals. So on the operation side of things, are you concerned about noise, neighborhood character, parking? On the regulation side of things, are you concerned about overregulation, cost of licenses? So the world is your oyster here. And again, you just go to menti.com and it should show up with the same code 460414. And I'll give folks some time to think about this, and you can enter multiple answers as well. Seeing a good variety here. Overregulation is the biggest one, and the words would probably be a bit bigger, but a few folks have entered it in different formats, so hear that. Noise is another big concern. Yeah, so a lot of concerns about wildfire, wildlife, traffic, noise. It's a little bit mesmerizing to watch all of this, I must say, come through. I like this format. So maybe just a couple more seconds to get the last thoughts in. Residency requirement came in as another big one that people are concerned about. So we hear that. And wildlife. And enforcement. So yes, we are working on enforcement for sure. One thing I do see in here is the 14 days free, and that was another question that was brought up in the WooFoo forums. And I do want to say that we will be moving away from that idea that you can have 14 nights by right. So you would fall into one of these uses regardless of the number of nights and go through whatever review period, either administrative or public hearing, for all of that. So there wouldn't be those 14 nights anymore. All right. Well, I think we can pause this and move on, but thank you everyone for filling that out. And this is going to be helpful for us to also go back and look at when we start drafting as well. So there were a couple other frequently asked questions that came in that I don't think were answered through this PowerPoint that I want to address now to hopefully appease some concerns and give people more information. So one question that we get is, can an accessory dwelling be used for short-term rentals or even long-term rentals? And an accessory dwelling, a dwelling unit is something that has a kitchen and a bathroom with bathing facilities. So you're currently only allowed to have one dwelling unit on a parcel unless there's certain other things that are met. So there are 3 other ways that you can get an accessory dwelling unit on your property. One is if you have a historic unit. The second is if you are seeking to build a family care unit. So there's a family member who needs some sort of care or supervision. And so a family care unit could be built for that. And the other one is an agricultural worker unit. So if you're zoned agricultural or rural residential, you can get an agricultural worker unit if you need someone on site to help support an ag use that you have on the property. So currently, no, accessory dwelling units cannot be used for short-term rentals or long-term rentals. And it's something that we will explore for the long-term rentals because that could be a potential way to increase affordable housing stock. But that is not part of this process, though it's something that we have heard from the public and we'll look into going forward. One question is, are we changing taxes through this process? And we are not. The only fees associated with this will be the licensing fee, but we're not changing any taxes. What will happen to existing short-term rentals? So this is something that we're looking into. If there are short-term rentals that are out there that have gone through the appropriate process and are operating appropriately under our current land use code, then perhaps those could just come in and get a license, but we're not sure yet of those. But if there are short-term rentals that are operating and haven't not gotten the proper approvals, then they would have to come through the process. So that's that. How will enforcement change? So I've addressed this a little bit, but some things that we have been looking into are potentially having some third-party assist Boulder County with that, and then the licensing fees that we charge could go towards that. With the license, it could be revoked, and we're thinking about requiring folks to post a license in a window and on any listings, so that will help with if it gets revoked, it's easy to see if someone is still posting with their license number and things like that, and people could look it up hopefully at the county. And then instituting fines. So that's kind of the process. And in terms of who enforces and how enforcement will be handled, we do currently have a code enforcement team, and so complaints can be made to them, and I don't expect that will change. And then they would forward that on and take care of the enforcement process. And how currently our code operates with, it's a complaint-based system. So if someone thinks that someone is operating under, inappropriately or without following the right rules, then they can submit a complaint to the code enforcement team, and then the code enforcement team would take it from there. If we do have a third party helping us actively look and make sure people are operating with valid licenses, maybe that's a way we can go forward too. So we're exploring that right now. And will Boulder County take into account private easements or other agreements? So the short answer to that is no. Boulder County, when we look at these things, we simply look for legal access. So is there a way to access the property? And if there are disputes over private easements or what that access actually grants, then that would have to be taken up by the private parties involved. And HOAs also was a hot topic, and HOAs can ban short-term rentals, and that would be separate from whatever process we do. So if an HOA bans a short-term rental, we couldn't come in and then say, oh, but you can have a short-term rental there anyway. So the next steps through this, after we have this virtual open house and gather your thoughts through it, we'll draft the code language. After that code language is drafted, there will be a referral period. So the code draft would go out to different internal members of Boulder County, and also would be sent out to the public and other agencies. And after that code is drafted and sent out, we would host another open house so that people have a chance to review what we've drafted, and then can provide some comments on that draft in an open house. And people can also just redline whatever we've sent out and email comments to Rainey or myself, and we'll look at those that way as well. And after all of that, then we would take the drafted language and any edits we make based on the referral comments, we would take that to a planning commission, which is a public hearing. So members of the public would have a chance to speak up there. The planning commission will then make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, and that will be another public hearing and another opportunity for folks to say something and make their voices heard. Our ultimate goal is to have these new regulations in place by the end of the year. So that's kind of the end goal here, but the next open house might likely be in September. So that's kind of the end of the presentation portion of this. Now we're going to have special like breakout sessions. There will be 2 different breakout sessions, but also I'll stay on the slide for just a moment because my email is there at the top and Rainey's email is there as well. And feel free to email us if your questions didn't get answered or you didn't feel heard in this forum at all, and we will do our best to answer those as well through email. So write that down. It's also on the website for this update, so you can find it there too. All right, so the next slide shows our 2 breakout rooms, and in these breakout rooms, I did see there were a lot of questions going on. Rainey was doing a good job of trying to answer some of them. And in these breakout sessions, we'll have more time for smaller discussions where we can field more questions and answer them. It's a little bit easier in smaller groups rather than this larger group. So the first virtual meeting room will be about accessory and seasonal short-term rentals. So if that's what you're most concerned about or most interested in, Rainey and Molly are heading that one up. There is a link for that Rick is putting in the chat and also listed here, as well as a dial-in and conference ID. The second breakout room will be with myself and Hannah, and it will be about vacation rentals. So those homes that are not seasonal cabins, but they can be used year-round, but someone just wants to rent those out as kind of an income property, and as at bed and breakfasts as well. So if you're most interested in those types of uses and where they can be allowed or not allowed, then you would join the second breakout room. And also, if you just wanted to come and learn about what our current code requires and what we're thinking of, and you don't want to stick around for anything else, you can feel free to head out and eat dinner or whatever it is that you want to do at this hour. Another thing, we will be still having a couple polls in these other breakout sessions. There will be different codes for those, but it would still be menti.com, and we'll talk about those in the breakout sessions. So
Can I ask a question? Just because I'm confused about which meeting room to go to.
Okay.
What's the difference between seasonal short-term rentals and vacation rentals? Is
Yes.
that the seasonal short-term rentals, the place that you're renting is only suitable for summer use, and then the vacation rentals is any other second home that you may own that you plan on renting, maybe into the fall, maybe once in a while in the winter?
Yes, yes, that's correct.
And I think we'll give several minutes for people to join those sessions. I'm going to jump over now, and we will not launch the first question before 6:55.